there's a lot of very important lessons that we can glean from what's going on in New Mexico about the anti-gun movement in America. And I don't want to lose sight of this. I want to talk about some of the great statements they've made in our favor that we're going to be able to use down the road. And I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, why I think a lot of the people in the anti-gun community are very upset with Governor Grisham for what she just did. Stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of First They Came for the Gun Owners, the detailed guide about how the anti-gun community intends to take away our guns bit by bit, step by step. You got to understand what they're trying to do to make sure that they don't accomplish their goals. All right, folks. So we all know what's been going on in New Mexico with Governor Grisham entering an executive order basically outlawing the Second Amendment in terms of being allowed to carry guns openly or concealed, even with a permit in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the related county. Okay? Now, there has been, strangely enough, a lot of pushback by various anti-gunners. And I want to talk about what they've said, and then I want to talk about what I think is really going on here. So let's just go through some of the quotes. First of all, I think it's very powerful, though, that the sheriff in Bernalillo, I think I pronounced that correct, in Bernalillo County, Sheriff John Allen, this is what he said. He says, quote, "I have a fact for you. Criminals do not follow the law of a public health order. This ban does nothing to curb gun violence." He's absolutely right. In fact, if you think about it, Sheriff John Allen should have been quoting something that you on this channel know quite well, which is the work of the 18th century Italian criminologist Cesare Beccaria, who taught our founding fathers that gun control laws do nothing to help law-abiding. They only help the criminal class because, as Beccaria as he wrote in the 18th century, it is a lot easier to attack an unarmed man than to attack an armed man. This passage was written down by none other than Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. That's how important Cesare Beccaria was, and that concept of gun control being bad for law-abiding citizens, that they actually wrote it down. Two are the most important founding fathers in all of America, who coincidentally died, or maybe not coincidentally, maybe it was God or divine driven, but they both died actually on the 50th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. They died on July 4th, 1826. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. Coincidence or divine intervention? You tell me. Same day, 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams. But let's carry on. In addition to the fact that the sheriff points out the obvious that was understood by the founding fathers before they even wrote the Second Amendment, let's talk about what some other people, and by the way, I should mention that the sheriff out there is a Democrat. He's not a Republican, he's a Democrat. That he's an elected Democrat, and yet he's making that observation. But let's talk about some other sort of prominent gun control supporters as a general matter and see what they have to say about Governor Grisham. And then I want to talk about why maybe they're saying this. Let's talk about the first thing, though, is let's go through some of the quotes. To begin with, of course, we have David Hogg, who just famously said, quote, "I support gun safety, but there is no such thing as a state public health emergency exception to the U.S. Constitution." That's what David Hogg said on Twitter. Then you look at Democratic New Mexico State Senator Joe Cervantes, and he said that this is an unconstitutional approach that undermines the important collaboration gun issues deserve and the important role of a governor to lead genuine reforms. Again, not a fan of this executive order. Then you look at Ted Lieu, a congressman. What does he say about this? He says, quote, I support gun safety laws. However, this order from the governor of New Mexico violates the U.S. Constitution. No state in the union can suspend the federal Constitution. There is no such thing as a state public health emergency exception to the U.S. Constitution. So those are just a couple examples, and there's some others out there as well. But I want to talk a little bit about what they're really saying. Now, of course, people say what they say, and they're probably quite earnest that they disagree with this, and they have their reasons. But let me tell you what I suspect is probably an undercurrent here. This is my speculation. If you go to chapter 3 of my book, First They Came for the Gun Owners, where I lay out the details of every single step the anti-gun is trying to do in extreme detail with facts and information and history here. Because again, if you don't know what the anti-gunners are trying to do, you can't stop them. And you want to try to get ahead of this as much as you can. So in chapter 3 of my book, First They Came for the Gun Owners, I entitle it The Propaganda Machine in Action, How the Left Drives Their Anti-Gun Agenda. Now, what I talk about in this chapter, of course, every chapter is chock full of information and facts, as you know it would be, because, well, it's a Mark Smith book, right? If you look on one of my pages, page 56 here, I talk about how the anti-gun movement changed their language, changed their propaganda, changed their tone and messaging dramatically about 10 or some odd years ago, where they went from really talking about gun bans to try to talk about gun safety, common sense safety, common sense gun reform. They started to soften the message, and I talk in extreme detail. In fact, I give an extensive quote here from a writer for The Atlantic. Now, The Atlantic is no friend of the right-wing movement as far as I'm concerned. I think they're classic, typical liberals that support the left-wing cause and almost certainly, of course, support gun control. That's my guess. So I wrote here that, and this is an article that was in The Atlantic magazine entitled, quote, "How the Gun Control Movement Got Smart." Did you hear what I just said? The Atlantic said, "How the Gun Control Movement Got Smart." That was the title of the article. But what was the gist of this article, and why does it tie into what's going on in New Mexico? Why does it tie into the fact that some anti-gunners seem to be upset with what the governor of New Mexico, Governor Grisham, did? The bottom line is that this is what the author wrote in The Atlantic. Here is how advocates of gun control used to talk about their cause. They openly disputed that the Second Amendment conferred the right to own a gun. Their major policy goals were to make handguns illegal and enroll all U.S. gun owners in a federal database. The group, now known as the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, was once known as Handgun Control, Inc. A 2001 book by the executive director of the Violence Policy Center was entitled "Every Handgun is Aimed at You: The Case for Banning Handguns." Contrast that with what we see today. This is, of course, from the Atlantic article. Contrast that with what we see today. Gun control groups don't even use the term gun control, with its big government implications favoring preventing gun violence. That's what they use instead. Democratic politicians preface every appeal for reform with a paean to the rights enshrined in the Second Amendment and bend over backwards to assure law-abiding gun owners they mean them no ill will. That's from the Atlantic. And this was the strategy of the left for the last 10 years or so, to try to really dupe, in a sense, Americans into thinking they supported the right to keep and bear arms when they were working desperately behind the scenes to undercut it bit by bit by bit. So I think one of the things that's bothered the anti-gun community is that this overt attack on the Second Amendment that's so obvious and apparent. She says you can't carry a gun in her county, or in that county of Albuquerque, right? In Bernalillo County. So it's an outright, clear, unequivocal attack on the right to keep and bear arms, and it kind of puts the lie to any propaganda efforts to try to soft pedal the notion of gun reform, gun safety, as opposed to gun control and gun confiscation. In other words, basically one of the things I think that people are upset about, is my guess, in the anti-gun community, is they're upset that the governor came out and said and did what the anti-gun community really would like to do, but they can't do it. So they're trying to undercut our rights bit by bit. It's kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. That's what they're trying to do now. Now, of course, they'll go whole hog, pardon the pun, if they ever can flip the Supreme Court into an anti-Second Amendment court and get, a filibuster-proof Senate, House, and White House. Then I think they'll go crazy, which will include all sorts of things, including adding new states, banning assault weapons, banning semi-automatics, and on and on. I think it'll never end. But again, we're not there right now, thank God. But that's where I think they would like to go if they could get there. So I just think when you look at these criticisms by people on the left of the governor of New Mexico, yes, it may be true that what they're saying they believe. I'm not saying they're lying, but I suspect that the undercurrent, and one of the things that concern a lot of people on the left in the anti-gun movement, is the fact that this is now giving the pro-Second Amendment movement an example to say, see, look at what the governor in New Mexico does. They really mean to take away our guns and disarm us in face of all these criminals. Many of the left are letting out of prison, by the way. Left-wing politicians are not putting in prison anymore and not punishing for violent crimes in these big cities. So I think in many respects, one of the things that's probably angered the anti-gun left about the governor of New Mexico's order is that it's contradicted the narrative that they respect the Second Amendment and just want common sense, reasonable gun control or reasonable gun safety reform, whatever the euphemism is you want to use is. And this, of course, makes it hard for them to accomplish this. So if you take what happened with the governor of New Mexico and then you add, quotes from, for example, Beto O'Rourke that says, hell yes, I'm going to take away your, AR-15s, where an entire audience of Democratic supporters stand up and give him a standing ovation and clap, 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 clap. Well, you take a couple examples of that and you keep replaying and reminding people in the Second Amendment community that indeed there is large swaths of this country that would like nothing more than to disarm you, converting you from a citizen into a serf or worse. So anyway, hope you learned a little bit something here. We'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.